Hello everyone, I'm Trish Lynch from IOHR here in London. Thank you for being with us for another episode of our Human Rights TV. Now, a modern day adventurer, traveller, explorer and most definitely a human rights champion, Charley Boorman has been touring the world as an ambassador for the UN Emergency Children's Fund since 2004. He's been raising funds and awareness about some of the world's most challenging issues that face children. He is, of course, a celebrity in his own right, and Charley is joining us today to tell us more about just what it takes to inspire others and to make a difference in a world where human rights has deteriorated immensely. Charley Boorman, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for being with us.
Oh no, it's a pleasure to be here. It's always I've just got to live up to your intro now. So yeah, hopefully.
Now, you've been a UNICEF ambassador for the UK since 2004. Tell me how you got involved in the first place and what motivated you to take on such a difficult task.
Well, I think it kind of all started with I decided to do a trip with Ewan McGregor. I think an adventure travel show called Long Way Round, and then we did one which was from London to New York, going east. Through Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Siberia, Far East Russia, and then we did one going from Scotland down to Cape Town through Africa. And when I met Ewan on a film set. I originally started as an actor. My father is a film director, a guy called Charley Boorman, who directed films like Deliverance and Excalibur and Hope and Glory and Emerald Forest and all sorts of movies. And as children, I have 3 sisters, and as children we were my father used to always say, you know, if we need a child in one of my movies, why pay for one when I've got 4 free children? So we used to get thrown into his movies, and so that's kind of how it started. During one of those movies I met Ewan, and I think our first conversation was about motorcycles, and that's more or less all we ever really talk about. And we ended up doing this TV show. And about 2 mates going around the world and seeing what happens. And because we were going to be away for about 4.5 months, we were looking to see, you know, what charity we could work with that would have representation in the countries that we're going through. And because we were leaving our children behind for such a period of time, it made sense to go with a charity that had children's welfare in mind, and so UNICEF came around. They have it's incredible. Their reach around the world is enormous, and so a kind of a relationship was born through that. So we visited 3 projects along the way on Long Way Round, and then we visited 3 or 4 projects on the way down when we did Long Way Down.
Had you any idea what you were signing up for when you agreed to do it?
Well,
or did it unfold as you went?
I think both Ewan and I were quite naive as to what we'd actually taken on, you know, from riding from London to New York, and then I think emotionally I hadn't contemplated the effect that it had on both myself and Ewan, and I mean, you know, not just the trip and the experience that we had, but the projects that we met along the way, you know, with working with UNICEF, and there were 3 very different types of projects. The first one was in Ukraine, and it was to do with Chernobyl and to do with the fallout and children who are still today being born with abnormalities because of the fallout. And then we did one in Mongolia. I couldn't remember for a second. Sorry. So we did one in Mongolia as well, which is all about children who orphan children who are living in the sewers of Ulaanbaatar, and how they survive. You know, in winter at minus 30, minus 40, and so it was. And I think because we were leaving our children behind as well. So when we came across these kids,
really, yeah.
Yeah, it really affected you.
Tell me about your visit to Uganda and the sad reality about the recruitment of child soldiers. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, I think when we visited Uganda with UNICEF, we went up into northern Uganda where the Lord's Resistance Army was very strong in those people, and you know, with child armies and you know, he would steal children and force them into doing things that that he wanted, and so because of that, AIDS is a big problem in Africa anyway. Yeah. But and so that's something which is there all the time, and orphaning children. So he would take those, or he would just take children, and these kids as young as 8 years old would be taken up and would be integrated into his craziness, and the children were asked to do terrible things towards other children, to people, to being asked to do murder, to torture, to do all sorts of stuff, and a lot of these children, if they can get out, come back with huge baggage, not only with AIDS, but with psychological problems,
trauma, scarred,
huge trauma. I mean, we met one girl who was 15, 15, and she had just gotten away from the Lord's Resistance Army, and she had been raped multiple times by the generals. She was pregnant, or she just had a child when we met her. She managed to get back to her village, but was not socially accepted because they were terrified of her, because she was a soldier, a child soldier. She'd missed out in her childhood. She had this baby from a warlord. She was never going to get married. She was always going to be set aside in her community. So how do you help someone like that? And the fact that she was unbelievably angry. I've never seen anyone more angry in all my life. I mean, it was shocking. And how do you help someone like that? And who helps someone like that? And the work that UNICEF were doing to integrate her back in, to retrain her, to educate the villagers about that, it's not her fault, that she's not dangerous, and that you can integrate, and this incredible journey that this poor girl has had to go through, and not only managed to get away, but then still has to be socially accepted as well back in her own community.
And of course, this is just one girl. Tell me about all those orphans whose parents had died, because I looked at the footage and all you could see was smiling faces. Yeah. How can these children smile when they've been through such trauma?
It's incredible, isn't it, when you see children, and Ewan and I visited lots of different projects with UNICEF over the years, and children who are living with HIV, or have lost their parents to HIV, or their aunts and uncles have passed away because of HIV, and so suddenly these children are left with no relatives because of this epidemic, and luckily there are, if they're lucky enough, they can get into these orphanages and be helped, and by living with HIV, taking antiretroviral drugs, you need to eat well, otherwise you struggle to survive even with HIV and antiretroviral drugs. So it's incredibly complicated. So these children are looked after by these charities, and when you turn up, there is so much enjoyment in kids. But kids are kind of, I think you realise that kids are very accepting in their situation, and kids kind of seem to. We could all, as grown-ups, could learn a lot from children who they really do. As much as it's wrong, and as much as they're in a terrible position, they're very accepting, and that's, I suppose, what makes it even nicer to try and help them is.
And just how widespread is the problem, and have you seen a massive change since you were there with Ewan all those years ago?
I think when we were there, the statistics, even in places like Botswana, I think it was 3 and 5 had HIV, and it was enormous, a massive problem. I think now, it's changed a bit, and you don't hear about it so much in the papers, but it's still there. And people like UNICEF, what they don't do now is they don't necessarily give it to local governments or government. They'll send the antiretroviral drugs via post to individual people to try and cut out the middleman. So that, because in some stories you hear unbelievable stories of certain governments around the world taking antiretroviral drugs and then selling them to other countries, and then just giving whatever to their own people. I mean, you know, some of the stories you hear are just horrendous. So so by posting it to the people who really need it, you're cutting out cutting out the middleman.
Nobody can tamper with their in between. Tell me about when you went to Ethiopia to visit the landmine victims. Some of the scenes that you must have seen there must have been absolutely heartbreaking. How do you, as an entertainer, as a father, cope with seeing this?
Yeah, I mean, you can see as the photo here, there's one of the guys that we met, and he had lost his leg. What they do is they've laid all these mines around on the Eritrea and Ethiopian border, and of course when they first start, they make maps of where the landmines are, and then over a period of time they get lost, or they don't want to give the maps back to people, so suddenly you don't know where they are. And one of the big things that they would do, which is just horrendous, as they're retreating and stuff, they would plant landmines around prickly pear trees, so which is you know, a delight for kids and people when they're, you know, it's a delicious fruit. And so the kids will go to the prickly pear, they'll take a fruit and lose a leg, and now there's such amazing and such a huge problem of where these mines are that it takes forever to clear them. There's millions of them, and so these kids have to work. And you know, as you walk along, you can see there's areas where people just know not to go because of the landmines. And
there's a whole initiative, isn't there? There's a whole UNICEF Landmine Education program. What does that entail, apart from looking out, obviously, for prickly pear trees? Yeah,
I mean, I think there's you know, it's been going on for such a long time to, you know, land clearance. It's one of the biggest landmine clearance is one of the biggest problems that we have, and you know, from areas where kids go to school, where UNICEF have an influence, you know, from the local schools to everything. They're educating children as to what to look out for and to be careful of these landmines, because, you know, as we all know, landmines are there to maim and to cause as much disruption as possible. You know, I'm sure originally they weren't designed to destroy kids' lives, but you know, when you're in a rural area and there's not very much money, you know, to get around. I've just had an accident on a motorcycle, and I'm struggling to walk properly at the moment, and so that's just, you know, coming to the studio here. I parked quite far away, so I struggled to get here. So you can just imagine, this is just on flat pavements, you can imagine what it's like for someone like him who lives in a rural area where the closest water is 3 kilometers away anyway, so he has to do that. So to try and get him help is hugely important, and that's why it's so important for these NGOs to be around to support them.
There are many stereotypes surrounding Africa in the West. You have travelled extensively throughout the continent. You've worked very closely with local people from various different African countries. What would you say that your perception is now? Would you say that it's changed since your travels?
I mean, I've been going to Africa for 30 years, and you know, people always say, "Oh, you're going to Africa, it's a dangerous place," and I go, "Oh, is it?" And they go, "Yeah, no, it's a terribly dangerous place." And I always say, "Oh, have you been?" No. And so it's just this conception that if something is going on somewhere, then it's just the whole of the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere. And you know, Africa is a very big continent, and most of the countries aren't in conflict and aren't at war. You know, I've travelled up and down Africa for you know, as I said, 25 years, and I've never had anything stolen. I've never got myself into any trouble. And you think about the thousands of people who are travelling through Africa at the moment. You know, students on gap years, on buses, on trains, in cars, on motorbikes. Mm-hmm. You know, or hitchhiking, or, you know, whatever it is, and we don't really hear that much about it, and so it's not as dangerous as people think. Sure, of course, you know, going into conflict where we know there's conflict areas going on, of course, you have to take care. But, you know, they say one of the most dangerous cities in the world for gun and knife crime is Washington, D.C. They say is some of the biggest gun and knife crime in the world, and that's just a mile from the White House. So, you know, think if you want to go to Africa and have an incredible experience and see wonderful things, you know, Africa is not a dangerous place.
Tell me,
the whole.
When you did the programme with Ewan, you travelled from Scotland to Cape Town in South Africa.
Yeah.
You drove through 18 countries, 2 continents, and you covered a staggering 15,000 miles. Tell me the kind of crew, the kind of backup team that you need to carry something like that off.
Well, I think, you know, what's interesting, you know, when Ewan and I did it, we had, there were 3 motorbikes. There was Ewan, myself, and Claudio, our cameraman, who travelled with us. And then we had a support vehicle sort of loosely following us. So if we did a UNICEF project, we would get the support guys to come in with an extra camera so that we could film, especially when you're filming with children, you want to do it very quickly and not interfere too much. And so we would do that. And then if a big story came about where we needed another camera, then that's how it worked. But you know, you can do your adventure in any way you want, really. You can. Did
you have cooks, doctors, mechanics? No. Did you have like a whole entourage with you?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. It was just Claudia, Ewan, and I most of the time. Then we had a backup crew, Russ and Dave, with another cameraman, and a couple of other guys, a fixer. And they kind of loosely followed us, and we would sort of hook up with them every 3 or 4 days. And you know, the idea for what we wanted to do was we wanted to sort of experience it as it sort of came. But you know, you can do it any way you want in Africa. I mean, we met a guy in Sudan. We were riding along the Nile, and he was on a bicycle, and he was struggling away. He was on his last sort of few months of I think it was 14 years of riding around on a bicycle, and he did it by himself. And his first question to us as we were riding down and he was riding up, his first question to us was, you know, where did you last get water? And because we're on a motorbike, we had no idea,
you know, how
far away. He was on a push bike, and all you could see was you couldn't see the bicycle for all the bottles of water. And he'd been on the road for years, and he was heading home because his mum was ill, and I said, well, how long is that going to take? He goes, another 4 or 5 months. And we actually, he was completely stone broke, and we ended up offering a bit of money to help him, and he wouldn't take it. And so eventually we stuck a long way down sticker on, and then said, look, we've just sponsored you, so here, take the money. So he took a bit of money off us to be able to finish his 14 or so years. And then 24 hours later we met a Japanese guy who'd been on the road for 7 years. And then 7 hours after that, we met a Swiss couple who'd been on the road for 9 years, all on bicycles.
So it certainly seems to attract the kind of free-spirited type of people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people that you meet along the way. I mean, you meet, you know, one of the great things about traveling overland, and in whichever way you want, on a bus or a train or a car or a bike or whatever it is you want to do, is the people that you meet along the way. And that's the real thing. You know, getting from A to B is great, but it's who you bump into and what happens to you along the way.
Now, I know you said that you've met all these crazy, fun, interesting people along the way, and you've also said that you've never really come to any great mishap.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that's happened to you when you were traveling through Africa?
Well, it was mostly Ewan falling off his motorbike. No, I'm joking. Well, actually, it's true. No, it's not. I think, I suppose traffic is one of the big things. I must say that, you know, I can pretty much ride a motorbike anywhere now in the world and not be nervous. But when I got into Egypt and headed into Cairo, I must say it's the only place in the world that I've actually was terrified for my life. I mean, the traffic on a motorbike was just bonkers there. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, one time we were coming into Cairo, Ewan and I and Claudio, and on this sort of 3-lane highway, and on the fast lane there was a truck coming up in the wrong direction, with a guy hanging out the window with his fist, waving his fist to everybody else, saying they're all going the wrong way. And that was, yeah.
That was a bit scary.
Yeah, it was the only place in the world that I really thought, oh God, this is tricky. But apart from that, you know, one of the great things about traveling through Africa is that there isn't anywhere else in the world where you see so much wildlife, or you're part of so much wildlife. I mean, I do these motorcycle tours, and I take a bunch of people through Africa every year, and we were going through northern Namibia, and on this dirt road, and we had three of us were riding together, and we had to stop because 40 elephants were crossing the road, and we just sat there for 20 minutes just while, you know, the daily traffic walked past. And not only was it elephants, but there was, you know, zebra and eland and kudu and springbok and buffalo. I mean, and there is, I've ridden pretty much everywhere, and you never see that kind of wildlife anymore. It's all gone, and that's what's so special about Africa, and about why we need to look after our wildlife, is because otherwise, before you know it, it'll all be gone.
Might not be here for too long.
And it just that would just be tragic, you know.
Tetanus in this country isn't a killer, but people in Nepal and Borneo, if they don't get the vaccinations that they need, it's a huge killer. Tell me what it was like to work side by side in Nepal with the UNICEF team, getting those highly valuable vaccinations to the people, sometimes in incredible challenging terrain, the middle of jungles, the top of mountains. It really was, by any means, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did one of the TV shows, as you said, was all about going from London to New York by any means of transport, so bikes, cars, trucks, boats,
whatever
it was. And when we were in Nepal, one of the projects we did with UNICEF was to follow a vaccine from the capital to this mountain hilltop in the middle of nowhere, and how much work had to be done, and of course the vaccines had to be kept cold, so there's this cold train. Then so we went, I think we started off in the city, got on a bus with
so was the clock ticking the whole time?
Yeah, the clock's ticking, because you've got to get, because it's refrigerated and look, there's no electricity to carry, you've got to get to the next place to change over the cold packs to keep it cold, to keep going. And so I think we took a bus, and then we took a little tuk-tuk, then we had to walk, and then we stayed in the night in this place and changed over
and you hacked your way through jungles and everything,
and finally got up to this village where they were, they're announcing that they're doing vaccination on that particular day. So people from miles and miles and miles away come with their children to be vaccinated.
So the people are happy to be vaccinated?
Oh, 100% happy to vaccinate. And they know, and so the pressure is to be there on the day that you say they're going to be there, because people will travel from 2 mountain ranges away to get there. And these mothers who obviously want their kids to be vaccinated, and so they will get a piece of paper as to what they've had and what they're going to have and stuff. And if they don't have the piece of paper, they do a thing called, which is measles, mumps, rubella, and tetanus. So the mother will always remember which limb has been injected.
Which one it was, yeah.
So maybe they won't necessarily remember what the vaccination is, but because they know which arm, then the person doing the vaccination knows.
They know, yeah.
Which vaccination to give them or what they haven't had yet.
I think you said that 70% of people would die who got tetanus in Nepal before the vaccinations. Do you have any idea what the figures are like now?
Oh, I think, well, I mean, now, that the vaccination program is working much better. People, even when I did it a few years ago now, it was a huge success. So figures I don't know off the top of my head, but certainly it is vastly improved from where it was into where it is now.
Which is all good. Now, you've used your celebrity and these incredible adventure travel programs that you do to highlight awareness and fundraising for UNICEF. Do you think this is a good vehicle to get the word for UNICEF out there?
I think if anybody is involved with a charity, or if a cancer charity or a children's charity, or whatever it is, it's not always about raising money. It's about raising awareness. And so if you can raise awareness in your school or in your workplace, or whatever it is that you're doing, and highlighting what's going on in that particular place, or something that you're really keen on, then then that spreads the word, and then maybe someone else will get involved, and maybe they'll donate some money, or maybe they'll donate their time, or whatever it is. So there are lots of ways of not just raising money, but raising awareness. One of the most precious things you can do is give your time to the charity that you've chosen, and sometimes that is worth more than money.
Talking about giving your time, tell me about your recent trip to Afghanistan to entertain the British troops over there. What happened over there?
Yeah, well, I've worked over the years. I've worked off and on with Help for Heroes and lots of different charities with soldiers, and we've been working with one Help for Heroes, and we were down in Wales. This is how we ended up in Afghanistan. So we're down there, and there were soldiers who had lost limbs and were rehabilitating. We took a bunch of guys who loved motorbikes out into the Welsh mountains to do some off-road riding. And there was one guy, there were a whole bunch of them. Some guys were missing an arm, and we got the adapted the bike so that people could ride. Anyway, so we're riding along with this one guy and the soldier, and he's a good rider, and we're following him, and I'm with this other guy, and he has this almighty crash in the trees, and he goes flying in the air, and this leg just starts spinning. An
artificial leg, I'm assuming.
It starts spinning around into the thing, and he lands and he crashes, and I stop, and he's going, my leg, I can't find my leg, and this other guy turns up and he's thinking, oh my God, he's lost his leg, and this other guy thought he'd actually lost his leg, so he was running around trying to find this leg, and eventually one of the other guys came up with this prosthetic leg, and had this big British flag on the stump, and he sort of presented it. But anyway, so we did a bunch of work with he put it back on, and off he went. But so we were doing a lot of it, and then they said, look, would you like to come out to Afghanistan to entertain the troops? And so I went with a fabulous friend of mine, a guy called Ross Noble, who's a great comedian, isn't he?
Yeah,
really funny guy. And so we went out with a guy called Billy Ward, and we did this chat show, and we went to Camp Bastion in Kandahar just before Christmas, and entertained the troops.
And how was that?
It was brilliant. We did have some dancing girls on, and so we realised that we had to put them on at the beginning and at the end, otherwise they'd all just leave. Yeah, so we had to have them on at the beginning and at the end. But it was an extraordinary experience, and I'm so grateful for the British Armed Forces to have let us go out there, and they do a lot of that. A lot of comedians go out and not only go to the big bases, but go to some of the smaller little bases where there's maybe only 50, 60 people, and they'll fly in by helicopter, entertain the troops, and then move on to another place. And there's a big, the British Armed Forces take that very seriously, and entertaining the troops. But it is interesting, you are sitting there doing this talk, and you can't tell anybody when the show's on, because then the locals will know what time to mortar you. So it's all sort of done by word of mouth and stuff. And then when you are doing the talks and stuff, you've got helicopters landing, you've got missiles heading, shooting off. It's quite a place. It's quite a place. I'll never forget one time we were traveling from Kandahar from Camp Bastion to Kandahar, and we're taking a flight, and you're taking these big cargo planes, and so we went to the place where you have the X-ray machine, for security. So I'm standing there in front of this guy who's got a machine gun and grenades and he's putting them all on the conveyor belt to go through the X-ray machine. And then all this stuff goes through the X-ray machine. He walks through the metal detector, which goes off anyway, and then he just picks up all the stuff and puts it back on. And I remember telling the guy, I said, "What was the point in doing all of that?" And so I never sat in a plane with people with so many weapons. But it was an extraordinary experience, and I don't think until you get out there do you realise, what goes on, and how hard working they are, and what risks they take. I mean, huge risks. So my hat off to anybody who goes out there and fights for the armed forces.
Charley, some of the things that you've seen while being an ambassador for UNICEF have been heartbreaking. You've seen children with HIV and AIDS, you've seen children who've been victims of landmines. All of these things, heartbreaking, terrible scenes, must stay in your mind. Do you think that this experience has changed you as a person?
I think I've been very fortunate to be able to work with UNICEF and to be able to see what is going on around the world, and it certainly opens your eyes and as to what's going on around the world. You know, something like 60% of the world lives in poverty, and I think we can be a little bit blinkered here about what's going on around the world. And so I think having been lucky enough to travel to all these different parts of the world and to have experienced these some horrible things and some wonderful things, you know, because some of the projects that we visit are real big positive projects where kids have gone through a system, are coming out the other end and have opportunity and have hope, you know, for their future. So it's not all bad, but yeah, no, I mean, I think when you do see these things and you see like the little girl in Uganda who had been abused so badly by the Lord's Resistance Army, you know, to see how brave and strong she is, you know, it certainly gives you hope, I think, about the world. But you know, we mustn't take our foot off the gas, and you know, every penny that anybody gives to any charity that they want to support really does work, you know, and UNICEF really is one of the good guys.
Charley Boorman, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing where your next adventure brings you.
Pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of IOHR Human Rights TV, putting human rights into focus. Don't forget, you can always keep up to date on our social media. Join us again next time. Until then, goodbye.